The Valley of the Dark Lords on Korriban had stood silent for millennia, a necropolis of crumbling statues and tomb entrances carved into rust-red stone. Wind howled through the canyon like the death rattle of forgotten Sith, carrying dust that had once been the bones of slaves who'd built these monuments to darkness. Above, twin moons cast pale light across the desolate landscape, illuminating nothing but shadows and the weight of ancient malevolence. Then, without warning, reality screamed. A point in space above the valley's center began to twist, folding in on itself like paper caught in invisible hands. The air shimmered with energy that had no place in this universe, emerald and gold sparks that crackled against the pervasive red hue of the dark side. The distortion widened, becoming a wound in the fabric of existence itself. And from that wound fell a man. Dr. Stephen Strange hit the ground hard, his cloak of levitation flaring too late to fully arrest his fall. He rolled across ancient stone, coming to rest on his back, gasping as pain lanced through his ribs. Above him, the dimensional rift collapsed with a sound like thunder played backwards, and then there was only silence and the distant howl of wind. For a moment, Strange simply lay there, staring up at unfamiliar stars. His hands, those surgeon's hands ruined and remade, trembled slightly as he pushed himself upright. The world spun. No, not the world. His perception. Something was wrong. The ambient magical energy he'd grown accustomed to sensing, the constant awareness of ley lines and dimensional boundaries that had become second nature since Kamartaj, all of it felt different, distorted. As if he were trying to read a book written in a language he almost understood but not quite. Strange checked himself for injuries. His ribs ached but weren't broken. The eye of Agamotto hung heavy around his neck. He could feel the time stone pulsing within it, erratic and uncomfortable. His sling ring remained on his right hand, but when he focused on it, trying to open a portal back to the Sanctum Sanctorum, nothing happened. The device sparked once, twice, then went dark. The cloak settled around his shoulders, its collar brushing against his cheek in what might have been reassurance. At least one thing still worked properly. He took a deep breath, centering himself, and began to assess his surroundings with the methodical precision of both surgeon and sorcerer. The valley stretched before him, a maze of tombs and statues depicting figures in flowing robes, hands raised in gestures of power. The architecture was ancient, clearly designed to intimidate, but there was something else, too. A presence. Strange could feel it pressing against his mind like a migraine forming behind his eyes, whispers in a language he didn't know, promising power, demanding submission, offering secrets. He didn't have a name for it yet, but he recognized the sensation. It was similar to the dark dimension's energy, that seductive pull toward entropy and domination. He'd felt it when facing Dormammu, when bargaining for Earth's survival. This was different in flavor but identical in intent, corruption wrapped in the promise of strength. Strange raised his hands to cast a diagnostic spell. Golden-orange light bloomed from his fingertips, forming the familiar geometric patterns of the mystic arts. The spell matrix stuttered, fighting against the ambient energy of this place, but Strange forced it into stability through sheer will. Information flooded his consciousness. Dimensional coordinates scrambled and unreadable. Atmospheric composition breathable but foreign. Massive energy signature permeating everything like background radiation. And then the spell detected something else. Movement. Multiple signatures approaching from the western ridge. Strange let the spell dissipate and turned toward the approaching presence. In the distance, silhouetted against one of the moons, he could see them. 5 figures in dark armor moving with military precision down the valley slope. They carried weapons that glowed with a red light, and even from this distance, Strange could sense the darkness emanating from them. Brother Tarsus led the hunting party with the confidence of a predator who'd never known defeat. The Imperial Inquisitorius had spent years purging the last remnants of the Jedi Order, and he'd personally claimed 17 kills. When the Emperor's command had come through, investigate the disturbance on Korriban, capture any Force-sensitive discovered alive, Tarsus had assembled his best hunters without hesitation. "Fan out," he commanded, his voice distorted through his helmet's vocabulator. "The disturbance originated from the valley center. Whoever triggered it may still be nearby." Sister Velcra, a former Jedi Guardian whose fall to the dark side had been particularly vicious, activated her double-bladed spinning lightsaber. The crimson blades hummed to life, casting red light across the ancient stones. "I sense something. Not Jedi, not Sith. Something other." They descended into the valley like predators, scenting blood. The Force guided them, pulling their attention toward the anomaly, and when they crested the final ridge, they saw him. A man in strange blue and black robes, wearing a red cloak that moved of its own accord, an ornate amulet glowing green at his chest. "Halt!" Tarsus shouted, igniting his lightsaber. "You are in violation of Imperial territory. Surrender, and you will not be harmed." Strange regarded them with clinical detachment. 5 opponents, each carrying what appeared to be plasma-based melee weapons. The energy signatures around them were consistent with the corruption he'd sensed earlier. Dangerous, but predictable. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," Strange said calmly. "I'm not looking for trouble. I'm simply trying to find my way home." "Your compliance is not optional," Sister Velcra hissed. She reached out with the Force, attempting to invade Strange's mind. The mental assault hit Strange's consciousness like a wave against a cliff. For a fraction of a second, he felt the invasive presence, and then his training kicked in. The Ancient One had taught him to fortify his mind against entities that could reshape reality itself. This crude telepathic probe was nothing. Strange's eyes flashed with golden light. "I said there's been a misunderstanding." He gestured sharply, and eldritch magic erupted from his hands in concentric circles of golden energy. The crimson bands of Sidorak materialized in the air, writhing like living things, and shot toward the Inquisitors with impossible speed. Brother Tarsus barely had time to raise his lightsaber before the mystical bonds wrapped around him, pinning his arms and lifting him 3 feet off the ground. Sister Velcra spun her lightsaber in a defensive pattern, and the bands shattered against the plasma blades, but Strange was already casting again. The mirror dimension spell activated, and reality folded. The valley around them began to shift, walls of stone rising and falling like waves, the ground becoming translucent glass reflecting impossible geometries. The Inquisitors stumbled, their connection to the Force suddenly muddy and confused. "What sorcery is this?" one shouted. Strange floated into the air, the cloak billowing dramatically. "I'll ask one more time. Where am I? What year is this? And what are those weapons?" Brother Tarsus struggled against the crimson bands, dark side energy crackling around him. "You dare use your tricks against the Inquisitorius? Lord Vader will hear of this. The Emperor himself will—" Strange's expression darkened. Emperor, Lord, tyrants who ruled through fear and mystical power. "Wrong answer," Strange said, and sent the bound Inquisitor tumbling through a portal 50 feet away. The remaining 4 Inquisitors regrouped. Sister Velcra's eyes narrowed. "He's powerful, but he tires. The Force is not with him. He draws on something else." She wasn't entirely wrong. Strange could feel the strain of maintaining the mirror dimension here. The ambient dark energy was fighting his spell, trying to corrupt it. "One last chance," Strange offered. "Lower your weapons, or I'll be forced to take more direct action." All 4 Inquisitors attacked as one. Reality itself became the weapon as Strange manipulated the pocket dimension's geometry with surgical precision. Platforms rose and fell, gravity shifted directions. Distances became meaningless. The Inquisitors fought valiantly, their lightsabers carving through stone and spell alike, but they were fighting a battle they couldn't understand. When the last Inquisitor fell, unconscious but alive, the Sorcerer released the mirror dimension. The 5 warriors lay scattered across the plaza, defeated but breathing. Strange landed softly. His hands trembled slightly. The exertion had been greater than expected. He knelt beside the closest Inquisitor and placed 2 fingers against the warrior's temple, a simple memory-reading spell, nothing invasive. What he found made his blood run cold. An empire spanning thousands of worlds, a purge of mystics, Jedi, hunted to extinction, an emperor who wielded dark power, and at his right hand, a dark lord named Vader. Strange pulled back, mind racing. He'd stumbled into a universe ruled by tyrannical mystical power turned toward conquest. Above, the twin moons continued their arc across alien stars. Dr. Stephen Strange realized that getting home might require first preventing an empire from spreading its darkness. Then he heard engines approaching from orbit. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The Imperial Star Destroyer Devastator hung in orbit above Korriban like a dagger pointed at the galaxy's throat. 5 kilometers of durasteel and firepower, bristling with turbolaser batteries and TIE fighter squadrons, it was a monument to the Empire's philosophy. Overwhelming force, absolute control, and the obliteration of anything that dared resist. Strange watched through the shuttle's viewport as they approached the massive warship, his analytical mind cataloging weapon placements, structural vulnerabilities, and the sheer scale of resources required to build such a vessel. Impressive, he admitted. Wasteful, but impressive. Vader stood behind him, a silent monolith of darkness. The Empire does not waste resources, Sorcerer. It demonstrates power. A Star Destroyer in orbit ensures compliance without firing a single shot. Fear is more efficient than bloodshed. Until someone stops being afraid, Strange replied. Then you need bigger Star Destroyers. It's a cycle that ends in either rebellion or collapse. I've seen it before. You have seen nothing, Vader said, but there was no heat in the words. Simply statement of fact. The shuttle passed through the Devastator's magnetic shield and entered the main hangar bay. Stormtroopers stood in perfect formation along the landing platform, their white armor gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights. Officers in gray uniforms moved with crisp efficiency, overseeing the organized chaos of a military vessel at full operational capacity. The moment the shuttle's ramp descended, every soldier snapped to attention. Strange descended with Vader, the cloak billowing behind him in a way that drew immediate attention. Whispers rippled through the assembled personnel, not loud enough to constitute insubordination, but present nonetheless. A man in strange robes walking beside Lord Vader as an apparent equal was not something the crew saw every day. "Admiral Constantine," Vader said as an officer approached. The man was middle-aged with the tight expression of someone perpetually calculating how not to anger his superior. "Prepare a course for Coruscant. Maximum speed." "At once, Lord Vader." Constantine's eyes flicked to Strange, lingering on the eye of Agamotto. "And the guest? Shall I prepare detention facilities?" "Guest quarters," Vader corrected. "He is here at the Emperor's invitation." The slight emphasis on invitation was not lost on anyone present. Strange was dangerous enough that Vader wasn't risking a confrontation aboard ship. That fact alone would fuel speculation across the entire vessel within the hour. As they walked through the Star Destroyer's corridors, Strange extended his senses carefully. The ambient energy here was different from Korriban, less concentrated darkness, more like background radiation of suffering and oppression. Thousands of minds pressed against his awareness, most disciplined and focused, but underneath ran currents of fear, ambition, and resignation. This was a ship run on strict hierarchy and the constant threat of lethal punishment for failure. "Tell me about this force," Strange said as they entered a turbo lift. "Your Emperor sensed my arrival from across the galaxy. You attempted to crush my throat without touching me. That Inquisitor tried to invade my mind. It's clearly a form of energy manipulation. But the principles seem different from what I know." Vader was silent for a moment, the mechanical breathing filling the confined space. "The Force is an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, penetrates us, binds the galaxy together. Those sensitive to it can sense the future, influence the weak-minded, move objects with thought alone. The Jedi believed in balance, in suppressing emotion to achieve harmony. They were fools." "And the Sith?" Strange asked, noting the way Vader's hands clenched slightly at the mention of Jedi. "The Sith understand what the Jedi denied. Passion gives strength. Anger, fear, hatred. These are not weaknesses to be suppressed, but tools to be wielded. Through the dark side of the Force, one can achieve power beyond the Jedi's comprehension. Power to save those you love. Power to reshape the galaxy itself." There was something deeply personal in that statement, Strange noted. A wound that had never healed, festering beneath the armor and mechanical breathing. "And yet here you are," Strange said carefully, "in constant pain, serving an emperor. Is this the freedom your dark side promised?" The turbo lift came to an abrupt halt. Vader turned, and Strange felt the temperature drop as dark side energy gathered around the Sith Lord like a storm preparing to break. "You walk a dangerous line, Sorcerer," Vader said, his voice carrying an edge that could cut steel. "The Emperor has granted you audience. Do not mistake that for protection. I have killed for lesser insults." Strange held his ground, though the cloak shifted protectively around his shoulders. "I'm not insulting you, Vader. I'm observing. You spoke of power to save those you love. Past tense. Which means you failed. And now you serve the very system that likely caused that failure. I'm trying to understand why." For a long moment, Vader simply stared at him through that impassive mask. Then, surprisingly, the pressure eased. The turbo lift resumed its ascent. "You will meet the Emperor," Vader said finally. "He will explain what you need to understand, and then you will make a choice. Serve the Empire willingly, or be broken until you serve regardless." "There's always a third option," Strange replied. "Not here. Not in this galaxy. The Emperor's will is absolute." The guest quarters were spartanly furnished but functional. A sleeping platform, a small desk with datapad access to the ship's non-classified networks, and a viewport showing the streaking stars of hyperspace. 2 stormtroopers stood guard outside the sealed door. "Not prisoners," Vader had said, but the guards suggested otherwise. Strange waited until he was alone, then immediately began examining the room for surveillance. He found 3 cameras and 2 audio pickups within the first minute. Rather than disable them, which would only draw attention, he settled cross-legged on the floor and entered a meditative trance. The Ancient One had taught him that magic required balance between knowledge and instinct, between careful study and spontaneous adaptation. Right now, Strange needed knowledge. He needed to understand this force that permeated everything, to map its relationship to the mystic arts, and to find a way to repair his sling ring. He reached inward, past his physical form, and entered his astral state. The transition was seamless. His spirit form rose from his body, translucent and glowing with golden light. In this state, he could perceive energy flows invisible to normal sight, could navigate spaces that physical matter could not reach. The Star Destroyer's corridors appeared different in astral form. The metal walls became translucent, revealing the ship's internal structure. power conduits like glowing veins, crew members as bright points of consciousness moving through the vessel's skeleton, and underlying everything, a field of energy that wasn't quite magical but wasn't entirely physical either. The Force. Strange moved through the ship like a ghost, passing through walls and sealed doors. The guards outside his quarters didn't even twitch as his astral form drifted past them. This was one advantage his magic held over the Force. Vader and his Inquisitors sensed disturbances in the Force, but the mystic arts operated on different principles. As long as Strange didn't use spells that directly interacted with physical reality, he was effectively invisible to Force users. He found the ship's archives 3 decks down, a secured chamber filled with data terminals and holocron storage units. 2 technicians worked at stations, their attention focused on updating star charts. Strange drifted between them completely unnoticed and began examining the accessible information. The Empire's history unfolded before him in fragments and files. The Galactic Republic, a democracy that had stood for thousands of years. The Clone Wars. A galactic conflict orchestrated, Strange's eyes narrowed at this, by the very man who would become Emperor. The Jedi Order, peacekeepers and mystics who served the Republic, betrayed and nearly exterminated in a single night. Order 66. The command that turned the Republic's clone army against their Jedi generals, and at the center of it all, Emperor Palpatine, also known as Darth Sidious, a Sith Lord who had manipulated an entire galaxy into accepting tyranny as the price of peace. Strange had seen this pattern before. In his own dimension, beings like Dormammu had conquered countless realities through similar methods, offering salvation while tightening chains, promising protection while demanding absolute submission. The Emperor was cut from the same cloth, just operating on a smaller scale. A soft chime interrupted his research. Strange's astral form turned to see another presence entering the archives. Not physical, but spiritual. A projection of consciousness that burned with dark side energy. Emperor Palpatine's presence manifested as a hooded figure, features hidden in shadow, eyes glowing with malevolent yellow light. The apparition moved through the archives as Strange did, examining data, sensing for disturbances. Searching. Strange remained perfectly still. In astral form, he was difficult to detect, but Palpatine was clearly more powerful than Vader, more attuned to subtle energies. If the Emperor sensed him now before Strange understood the full scope of what he faced, the element of surprise would be lost. The Emperor's projection paused, head tilting as if listening to something. Then, impossibly, those yellow eyes turned directly toward Strange's position. Curious. Palpatine's voice echoed through the astral plane, thin and reedy and ancient. A presence I cannot quite grasp, like smoke or shadow. You are the one Vader found, yes? The sorcerer from beyond the stars? Strange didn't respond, didn't move. In astral form, silence could mean invisibility. Palpatine's laugh was dry and crackling. Oh, I sense you there, hiding in the spaces between, trying to learn our secrets while keeping your own. How delightfully arrogant, how beautifully foolish. The projection drifted closer, and Strange could feel the Emperor probing the astral space around him, seeking but not quite finding. You are powerful, I grant you. Your mind is shielded beyond what any Jedi achieved. But power without understanding is merely potential waiting to be controlled. The Emperor's presence suddenly surged, flooding the archives with dark side energy. Strange felt it wash over his astral form, corruption given shape, hatred refined into art, suffering transformed into exquisite control. It was like being submerged in poisoned honey, sweet and deadly and almost impossible to resist. Strange drew on his training, on every meditation with the Ancient One, on every moment he'd resisted the dark dimension's call. His astral form blazed with golden light, the Seraphim's blessing manifesting as protective radiance. The two energies collided in the space between physical and spiritual, and for a fraction of a second, Strange felt the Emperor's surprise. "Remarkable," Palpatine whispered. "You do not draw on the Force. Yet you resist the dark side. You are not Jedi, yet you wield power I have not seen in a millennium. Tell me, Sorcerer, what are you?" Strange made his choice. He let his astral form become visible, manifesting fully in the spiritual space. "I'm someone who's fought things that make your empire look like a planetary government. I'm someone who bargained with Dormammu, a being that devours dimensions. And I'm someone who's very interested in why your holocron summoned me here." Palpatine's eyes gleamed. "Ah, direct. I appreciate that. So few have the courage to speak plainly in my presence." The Emperor's projection circled Strange's astral form like a predator evaluating prey. "The holocron was not mine, Sorcerer. It belonged to Darth Andedu, a Sith Lord who ruled millennia before my birth. His knowledge of immortality, of life transference, of bridging the spaces between worlds, unparalleled. When I sensed its activation, I knew something extraordinary had occurred." "You wanted me here," Strange realized. "I wanted to see what would answer such a summons, and you exceeded my expectations. A sorcerer from another dimension, wielding powers that transcend the Force itself. You could be useful. I don't work for tyrants." Palpatine's laugh echoed through the archives. "Everyone works for someone, Dr. Strange. Yes, I know your name. I have already begun researching you through the Force, reading the echoes of your essence. You served others once, your patients, your world, your avengers. You make sacrifices for what you deem the greater good. How is that different from serving the Empire's order?" "The difference is choice," Strange said. "I chose my path. Your subjects have no choice at all. A technicality." The Emperor's projection began to fade. "We will speak more when you arrive on Coruscant. I look forward to demonstrating what true power looks like, and perhaps in time you will understand that order, even enforced order, is preferable to chaos." The presence vanished, leaving Strange alone in the archives. His astral form returned to his body in an instant, and he gasped as physical sensation flooded back, the cloak wrapped around him protectively as he stood, legs slightly unsteady. The Emperor knew he'd been probing, knew about his astral projection, and rather than viewing it as a threat, Palpatine seemed intrigued. That was possibly more dangerous than outright hostility. Strange moved to the viewport and watched hyperspace streak past. Somewhere ahead lay Coruscant, the Empire's capital, and a meeting with one of the most dangerous beings this galaxy had ever produced. He needed a plan, and he needed it before they arrived. The Imperial Star Destroyer Devastator hung in orbit above Korriban like a dagger pointed at the galaxy's throat. 5 kilometers of durasteel and firepower, bristling with turbolaser batteries and TIE fighter squadrons, it was a monument to the Empire's philosophy. Overwhelming force, absolute control, and the obliteration of anything that dared resist. Strange watched through the shuttle's viewport as they approached the massive warship, his analytical mind cataloging weapon placements, structural vulnerabilities, and the sheer scale of resources required to build such a vessel. Impressive, he admitted. Wasteful, but impressive. Vader stood behind him, a silent monolith of darkness. "The Empire does not waste resources, Sorcerer. It demonstrates power. A Star Destroyer in orbit ensures compliance without firing a single shot. Fear is more efficient than bloodshed." "Until someone stops being afraid," Strange replied. "Then you need bigger Star Destroyers. It's a cycle that ends in either rebellion or collapse. I've seen it before." "You have seen nothing?" Vader said, but there was no heat in the words. Simply statement of fact. The shuttle passed through the Devastator's magnetic shield and entered the main hangar bay. Stormtroopers stood in perfect formation along the landing platform, their white armor gleaming under harsh fluorescent lights. Officers in gray uniforms moved with crisp efficiency, overseeing the organized chaos of a military vessel at full operational capacity. The moment the shuttle's ramp descended, every soldier snapped to attention. Strange descended with Vader, the cloak billowing behind him in a way that drew immediate attention. Whispers rippled through the assembled personnel, not loud enough to constitute insubordination, but present nonetheless. A man in strange robes walking beside Lord Vader as an apparent equal was not something the crew saw every day. "Admiral Constantine," Vader said as an officer approached. The man was middle-aged with the tight expression of someone perpetually calculating how not to anger his superior. "Prepare a course for Coruscant. Maximum speed." "At once, Lord Vader." Constantine's eyes flicked to Strange, lingering on the eye of Agamotto. "And the guest? Shall I prepare detention facilities?" "Guest quarters," Vader corrected. "He is here at the Emperor's invitation." The slight emphasis on invitation was not lost on anyone present. Strange was dangerous enough that Vader wasn't risking a confrontation aboard ship. That fact alone would fuel speculation across the entire vessel within the hour. As they walked through the Star Destroyer's corridors, Strange extended his senses carefully. The ambient energy here was different from Korriban, less concentrated darkness, more like background radiation of suffering and oppression. Thousands of minds pressed against his awareness, most disciplined and focused, but underneath ran currents of fear, ambition, and resignation. This was a ship run on strict hierarchy, and the constant threat of lethal punishment for failure. "Tell me about this force," Strange said as they entered a turbo lift. "Your Emperor sensed my arrival from across the galaxy. You attempted to crush my throat without touching me. That Inquisitor tried to invade my mind. It's clearly a form of energy manipulation. But the principles seem different from what I know." Vader was silent for a moment, the mechanical breathing filling the confined space. "The Force is an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, penetrates us, binds the galaxy together. Those sensitive to it can sense the future, influence the weak-minded, move objects with thought alone. The Jedi believed in balance, in suppressing emotion to achieve harmony. They were fools." "And the Sith?" Strange asked, noting the way Vader's hands clenched slightly at the mention of Jedi. "The Sith understand what the Jedi denied. Passion gives strength. Anger, fear, hatred. These are not weaknesses to be suppressed, but tools to be wielded. Through the dark side of the Force, one can achieve power beyond the Jedi's comprehension. Power to save those you love. Power to reshape the galaxy itself." There was something deeply personal in that statement, Strange noted. A wound that had never healed, festering beneath the armor and mechanical breathing. "And yet here you are," Strange said carefully, "in constant pain, serving an Emperor. Is this the freedom your dark side promised?" The turbo lift came to an abrupt halt. Vader turned, and Strange felt the temperature drop as dark side energy gathered around the Sith Lord like a storm preparing to break. "You walk a dangerous line, Sorcerer," Vader said, his voice carrying an edge that could cut steel. "The Emperor has granted you audience. Do not mistake that for protection. I have killed for lesser insults." Strange held his ground, though the cloak shifted protectively around his shoulders. "I'm not insulting you, Vader. I'm observing. You spoke of power to save those you love. Past tense. Which means you failed. And now you serve the very system that likely caused that failure. I'm trying to understand why." For a long moment, Vader simply stared at him through that impassive mask. Then, surprisingly, the pressure eased. The turbo lift resumed its ascent. "You will meet the Emperor," Vader said finally. "He will explain what you need to understand, and then you will make a choice. Serve the Empire willingly, or be broken until you serve regardless." "There's always a third option," Strange replied. "Not here. Not in this galaxy. The Emperor's will is absolute." The guest quarters were spartanly furnished but functional. A sleeping platform, a small desk with datapad access to the ship's non-classified networks, and a viewport showing the streaking stars of hyperspace. 2 stormtroopers stood guard outside the sealed door. "Not prisoners," Vader had said, but the guards suggested otherwise. Strange waited until he was alone, then immediately began examining the room for surveillance. He found 3 cameras and 2 audio pickups within the first minute. Rather than disable them, which would only draw attention, he settled cross-legged on the floor and entered a meditative trance. The Ancient One had taught him that magic required balance between knowledge and instinct, between careful study and spontaneous adaptation. Right now, Strange needed knowledge. He needed to understand this force that permeated everything, to map its relationship to the mystic arts, and to find a way to repair his sling ring. He reached inward, past his physical form, and entered his astral state. The transition was seamless. His spirit form rose from his body, translucent and glowing with golden light. In this state, he could perceive energy flows invisible to normal sight, could navigate spaces that physical matter could not reach. The Star Destroyer's corridors appeared different in astral form. The metal walls became translucent, revealing the ship's internal structure, power conduits like glowing veins, crew members as bright points of consciousness moving through the vessel's skeleton, and underlying everything, a field of energy that wasn't quite magical but wasn't entirely physical either. The Force. Strange moved through the ship like a ghost, passing through walls and sealed doors. The guards outside his quarters didn't even twitch as his astral form drifted past them. This was one advantage his magic held over the Force. Vader and his Inquisitors sensed disturbances in the Force, but the mystic arts operated on different principles. As long as Strange didn't use spells that directly interacted with physical reality, he was effectively invisible to Force users. He found the ship's archives 3 decks down, a secured chamber filled with data terminals and holocron storage units. 2 technicians worked at stations, their attention focused on updating star charts. Strange drifted between them completely unnoticed and began examining the accessible information. The Empire's history unfolded before him in fragments and files. The Galactic Republic, a democracy that had stood for thousands of years. The Clone Wars, a galactic conflict orchestrated, Strange's eyes narrowed at this, by the very man who would become Emperor. The Jedi Order, peacekeepers and mystics who served the Republic, betrayed and nearly exterminated in a single night. Order 66. The command that turned the Republic's clone army against their Jedi generals, and at the center of it all, Emperor Palpatine, also known as Darth Sidious, a Sith Lord who had manipulated an entire galaxy into accepting tyranny as the price of peace. Strange had seen this pattern before. In his own dimension, beings like Dormammu had conquered countless realities through similar methods, offering salvation while tightening chains, promising protection while demanding absolute submission. The Emperor was cut from the same cloth, just operating on a smaller scale. A soft chime interrupted his research. Strange's astral form turned to see another presence entering the archives. Not physical, but spiritual. A projection of consciousness that burned with dark side energy. Emperor Palpatine's presence manifested as a hooded figure, features hidden in shadow, eyes glowing with malevolent yellow light. The apparition moved through the archives as Strange did, examining data, sensing for disturbances, searching. Strange remained perfectly still. In astral form, he was difficult to detect, but Palpatine was clearly more powerful than Vader, more attuned to subtle energies. If the Emperor sensed him now before Strange understood the full scope of what he faced, the element of surprise would be lost. The Emperor's projection paused, head tilting as if listening to something. Then, impossibly, those yellow eyes turned directly toward Strange's position. Curious. Palpatine's voice echoed through the astral plane, thin and reedy and ancient. A presence I cannot quite grasp, like smoke or shadow. You are the one Vader found, yes? The sorcerer from beyond the stars? Strange didn't respond, didn't move. In astral form, silence could mean invisibility. Palpatine's laugh was dry and crackling. Oh, I sense you there, hiding in the spaces between, trying to learn our secrets while keeping your own. How delightfully arrogant. How beautifully foolish. The projection drifted closer, and Strange could feel the Emperor probing the astral space around him, seeking but not quite finding. You are powerful, I grant you. Your mind is shielded beyond what any Jedi achieved. But power without understanding is merely potential waiting to be controlled. The Emperor's presence suddenly surged, flooding the archives with dark side energy. Strange felt it wash over his astral form, corruption given shape, hatred refined into art, suffering transformed into exquisite control. It was like being submerged in poisoned honey, sweet and deadly and almost impossible to resist. Strange drew on his training, on every meditation with the Ancient One, on every moment he'd resisted the dark dimension's call. His astral form blazed with golden light, the Seraphim's blessing manifesting as protective radiance. The two energies collided in the space between physical and spiritual, and for a fraction of a second, Strange felt the Emperor's surprise. Remarkable, Palpatine whispered. You do not draw on the Force. Yet you resist the dark side. You are not Jedi, yet you wield power I have not seen in a millennium. Tell me, Sorcerer, what are you? Strange made his choice. He let his astral form become visible, manifesting fully in the spiritual space. I'm someone who's fought things that make your empire look like a planetary government. I'm someone who bargained with Dormammu, a being that devours dimensions, and I'm someone who's very interested in why your holocron summoned me here. Palpatine's eyes gleamed. Ah, direct. I appreciate that. So few have the courage to speak plainly in my presence. The Emperor's projection circled Strange's astral form like a predator evaluating prey. The holocron was not mine, Sorcerer. It belonged to Darth Andedu, a Sith Lord who ruled millennia before my birth. His knowledge of immortality, of life transference, of bridging the spaces between worlds, unparalleled. When I sensed its activation, I knew something extraordinary had occurred. You wanted me here, Strange realized. I wanted to see what would answer such a summons, and you exceeded my expectations. A sorcerer from another dimension, wielding powers that transcend the Force itself. You could be useful. I don't work for tyrants. Palpatine's laugh echoed through the archives. Everyone works for someone, Dr. Strange. Yes, I know your name. I have already begun researching you through the Force, reading the echoes of your essence. You served others once, your patients, your world, your avengers. You make sacrifices for what you deem the greater good. How is that different from serving the Empire's order? The difference is choice, Strange said. I chose my path. Your subjects have no choice at all. A technicality. The Emperor's projection began to fade. We will speak more when you arrive on Coruscant. I look forward to demonstrating what true power looks like, and perhaps in time you will understand that order, even enforced order, is preferable to chaos. The presence vanished, leaving Strange alone in the archives. His astral form returned to his body in an instant, and he gasped as physical sensation flooded back, the cloak wrapped around him protectively as he stood, legs slightly unsteady. The Emperor knew he'd been probing, knew about his astral projection, and rather than viewing it as a threat, Palpatine seemed intrigued. That was possibly more dangerous than outright hostility. Strange moved to the viewport and watched hyperspace streak past. Somewhere ahead lay Coruscant, the Empire's capital, and a meeting with one of the most dangerous beings this galaxy had ever produced. He needed a plan, and he needed it before they arrived. The ruins of Korriban's lower valley stretched endlessly beneath the crimson-tinted sky, jagged monoliths of black stone jutting like skeletal fingers into the wind. Strange had barely stabilized the mirror dimension within the valley when a faint shimmer caught his eye, a group of figures moving cautiously between the broken statues and shattered Sith shrines. Their movements were deliberate, trained, but wary. He narrowed his gaze, sensing a subtle, unfamiliar energy. Not quite force-sensitive, not quite mundane. Rebels. They hadn't seen him yet, and he had a choice. He could retreat into the mirror dimension, vanish, and leave them to their scavenging, or make contact. Drawing a slow, deliberate breath, he stepped forward, letting the folds of his cloak of levitation ripple behind him. The rebels froze immediately, hands hovering over blasters, eyes scanning. Strange lifted a hand, forming a glyph of containment in the air, a harmless illusionary display meant to show his intentions. "I'm not here to fight," he said, voice carrying unnaturally across the stone winds. "But I need information." A tall woman with a blaster lowered first, stepping forward. Her uniform was patched, unpolished, the mark of a group surviving on stealth rather than rank. "You're not Imperial," she said, suspicion sharpening her tone. "And you're not Jedi. You feel different." Strange gave a small smile, nodding toward the nearby ruins. "Different, yes. And the Sith are close. Closer than you might expect. If you want to leave this valley alive, we should talk." The rebels exchanged uneasy glances. Trust was a scarce commodity in the Empire era, and Strange was an anomaly. Wrapped in strange robes, levitating, speaking of magic they could barely comprehend, but desperation weighed on them. The holocron fragments they were scavenging had drawn Imperial patrols repeatedly, and their hiding place was compromised. Finally, the woman nodded. "We're listening, but no funny business." Strange studied their group. 5 individuals in total, each carrying blasters, vibroblades, or makeshift explosives. The energy between them was tight, defensive, yet clever. They were survivors of some kind of organized rebellion, likely early cells still forming a network against Imperial oppression. "I can help you," Strange said carefully. "But first I need to understand the artifacts you've recovered. Sith magic isn't like your galaxy's weapons. It's alive, and it corrupts those who touch it unprepared." He knelt beside a holocron fragment, the pale orange glow flickering as he extended a hand. Energy from his mystic glyphs licked around it, careful not to activate the dark secrets within. Immediately, the rebels recoiled. "Don't touch that," the woman warned sharply. Strange ignored them for a moment, scanning. The artifact pulsed, not just with Sith alchemy, but with a subtle interdimensional resonance, like it was aware of him, of the rift that had brought him here. His brow furrowed. The holocron's energy was wrong. Not just dangerous, it was calling across realities, seeking to unbalance the universe itself. One of the rebels, a young man with streaked hair and a scanner, whispered, "You can feel it too?" Strange nodded. "Yes. And if the Empire learns how to harness it, your galaxy, my galaxy, any galaxy connected by the multiverse could collapse." The weight of his words silenced them. They were fighting the Empire, yes, but even the Emperor could not yet imagine the cosmic consequences he was inadvertently courting. Strange's gaze hardened. "I need your help navigating this valley. In return, I can protect you from Imperial patrols and from the Sith themselves. But you must follow my lead." Suspicion still lingered, but necessity triumphed. "We're not pawns," the woman said, voice tight. "If you're lying, we shoot first and ask questions never." Strange allowed a ghost of a grin. "I wouldn't expect anything less." Using a combination of levitation and illusionary cloaks, Strange guided the rebels through a labyrinth of collapsed ruins. He manipulated shadowy glyphs to mask their trail, folding the landscape subtly with minor transmutations. Rocks shifted to cover footprints, crumbling walls seemed continuous, corridors twisted unnaturally to mislead any Imperial scanners. As they advanced, Strange noted the subtle differences in force sensitivity among them. One carried a latent spark, almost imperceptible, a force-sensitive child hiding in plain sight. It reminded him uncomfortably of Earth's fragile balance when magical energy ran unchecked. Sith artifacts could amplify these sparks dangerously. If Imperial agents captured them with Strange present, the child's life could be extinguished in an instant. He quietly muttered a protective binding, weaving a spell that would shield the group from force detection. The rebels whispered among themselves, debating the wisdom of relying on this strange sorcerer. Strange sensed their unease but did not interrupt. He understood caution. Trust had to be earned here, in a galaxy where betrayal was as common as breath. As they reached the edge of a collapsed temple, Strange stopped, his hand raised. Through the broken walls, he could see a patrol of Imperial stormtroopers moving methodically among the ruins, searching for scavengers. The group froze, but Strange gestured them forward. "Follow my lead," he said. In a fluid motion, he conjured a pocket of darkness, folding space lightly around them, and the group vanished from the patrol's sensors. Emerging on the far side, Strange felt the subtle thrill of the rebels' tentative relief. "I don't know what you are," the woman admitted, lowering her weapon slightly, "but if you're on our side, we might just survive this." Strange's gaze lingered on the holocron fragments they carried. "On our side," he repeated. "Yes, but this isn't just your fight anymore. It's a battle that could echo across all dimensions." His tone carried both warning and resolve. They were allies for now, but he knew the fragile peace would not last. Imperial forces were relentless, and the Sith would not ignore a sorcerer of his caliber meddling in their affairs. Strange considered the long-term implications. These rebels were fighting an empire that had already extinguished the Jedi. If he remained here, he could tip the balance, but meddling too much might draw Palpatine's full attention. Still, he had come through a rift, a tear in reality itself. This was no longer about returning home. It was about survival, strategy, and understanding the mystical forces intertwined with the dark side. He could not allow the holocron fragments to be used recklessly. He adjusted his cloak, letting it snap forward dramatically. "We move at dawn. And remember, one wrong move, and none of us leave this valley alive." Above, the twin suns began to rise, casting long shadows across jagged tombs of long-dead Sith lords. Strange felt the subtle tug of the rift that had brought him here. He didn't know when or if he would ever return to Earth. But in this moment, he had a purpose: protect these rebels, learn what he could about the Sith artifacts, and prevent the holocron from being weaponized beyond comprehension. Even the Force itself seemed to pause, as if curious whether this stranger, a master of an alien magic, could survive the deadly web of Sith power and Imperial vigilance. Strange clenched his fist, summoning a quiet hum of eldritch energy in preparation for the inevitable confrontation. This alliance was fragile, untested, but necessary. The galaxy, both his and theirs, hung in the balance. The rebels gathered close as Strange outlined their immediate plan. He combined his knowledge of arcane geometry with tactical schematics of the valley, marking escape routes, potential ambush points, and areas contaminated by Sith energy. He noticed the smallest details, the glint of broken glass like kyber fragments, the subtle pulse of residual darkside energy, the scent of ozone mixed with sulfur from long-extinct lava vents. Every sensory observation became data for strategic advantage. "We need to move fast and avoid prolonged exposure," he instructed. "Even a single Sith echo can alert patrols." The woman's hand hesitated near her blaster, then she nodded. "We'll follow your lead. For now." Strange gave a curt nod, letting the cloak fall to its usual drape. He could feel the ancient valley pressing on him, the weight of millennia of Sith ambition thick in the air. But here, amid ruins and ghosts, he also felt purpose. For the first time since the rift had torn him from Earth, Strange believed he might stand a chance, not just to survive, but to prevent a catastrophe that could echo through countless worlds. The journey from Korriban to Dathomir was perilous, even for someone who could bend reality with a flick of his hand. Strange levitated over the rugged terrain, the rebels clinging to the back of his cloak like passengers on a spectral transport. Winds buffeted them, carrying the acrid scent of ash and the faint metallic tang of long-dead battlefields. The Night Sisters' homeworld was a swirling tapestry of red forests and obsidian spires, the moons casting eerie shadows across jagged terrain. The very air vibrated with magic, an energy both alien and familiar, a cousin to the dark dimension but raw, visceral, and fueled by the will of the living. "Why Dathomir?" the young rebel with streaked hair asked nervously, scanning the twisted treetops for potential threats. "Couldn't we just hide somewhere safer?" Strange's eyes glinted with a mixture of calculation and unease. "Because the Night Sisters, like the Sith, tap into a power that is dangerous, ancient, and fundamentally tied to this galaxy. Understanding their rituals will help me repair the sling ring and protect your universe from these artifacts." The forest closed around them as they descended into a valley dominated by gnarled trees, their roots coiling like serpents, their leaves glowing faintly red in the dim light. Strange felt the pull immediately, the dark but structured energy of Night Sister magic resonating against the chaotic tug of the rift. Unlike the Sith, whose power was driven by ambition and suffering, the Night Sisters channeled nature and spirit into their spells. Their magic was communal, ritualistic, almost musical, yet it bore an edge of cruelty and cunning. Strange noted the similarities to Dormammu's dark dimension, the manipulation of energy, the bending of perception, the leverage of life force. But here, the spells were tied to a physical, mortal plane. A shadow detached itself from a distant grove. A woman stepped forward, her skin pale, her hair a stark white cascade. Her eyes glowed faintly as she raised a hand, and a spectral whip of greenish energy coiled through the air. "Who dares enter Dathomir unbidden?" she demanded, voice like wind through bones. Strange lifted a hand in a non-threatening gesture. "I am Dr. Stephen Strange. I mean no harm. I seek understanding, not conquest. I wish to study your magic and perhaps learn how it connects to the artifacts I have encountered." The Night Sister's gaze flicked to the rebels huddled behind him, then back to Strange. "A mortal who walks through the weave of dimensions," she said slowly. "You are unstable, dangerous." Strange inclined his head. "Perhaps, but the artifacts you guard, they threaten more than your world. I am here to prevent misuse, and I can protect you from the Sith." A tense silence followed. The rebels muttered among themselves, wary of negotiating with a sorceress whose reputation was whispered in fear and respect. Strange, however, recognized the subtleties of her stance. She was curious but calculating, assessing his power, gauging his intent, and testing his resolve. He had learned over centuries that raw power alone was insufficient. Understanding, diplomacy, and strategy were just as vital. "Very well," the Night Sister said finally, stepping aside. "You may observe, but you touch nothing, and you leave nothing altered. Our rituals are older than the Empire. They do not forgive interference." Strange nodded, grateful for her conditional permission. He followed as she led them to a circular clearing, the ground etched with runes, the trees forming a natural amphitheater. At the center lay a cauldron, swirling with a dark, viscous liquid that seemed almost alive, resonating faint pulses in time with the ambient force energy. As the ritual began, Strange observed closely. He noted the precise gestures, the chanting that echoed through the valley, and the transfer of energy from living creatures into the spell. The parallels to eldritch magic were undeniable. The binding of energy, the conversion of life force into magical constructs, the risk of being consumed by one's own power. Yet the difference was striking. The Night Sister's magic was communal, drawn from intent and connection to the natural world, whereas his own spells were largely individual, relying on the Vishanti's favor and his own focus. He tested a subtle spell, a minor binding of energy around the cauldron, careful not to disrupt the ritual. The Night Sister stiffened, sensing his interference, but instead of hostility, a flicker of interest appeared in her eyes. "You do not follow the weave," she said softly. "You bend it." Strange allowed a ghost of a smile. "That's one way to put it." He realized the potential. By understanding how their magic harmonized with the Force, he could stabilize the sling ring and even counteract the dark currents emanating from the holocron fragments. The rebels watched, torn between awe and fear. None of them had ever witnessed magic like this. Neither Jedi nor Sith nor even Imperial alchemy approached this level of subtlety and raw capability. Strange's mind raced with calculations, theorizing ways to combine his eldritch power with this new energy. He began a cautious dialogue with the Night Sister, asking questions about amplification, containment, and the way energy flowed through living matter. She responded in cryptic hints, testing his understanding without revealing her full knowledge. Hours passed. The suns shifted, casting long, blood-red shadows across the amphitheater. Strange had learned enough to begin repairing the sling ring, using mystical glyphs informed by the Night Sister's energy manipulations. He discovered that by weaving in the ambient force, he could temporarily harmonize his magic with the galaxy's natural currents. It was painstaking work, requiring concentration, focus, and delicate adjustments. But by nightfall, he had created a rudimentary portal capable of short jumps within this galaxy. Returning to Earth was still impossible, but he now had mobility and a tool to continue combating the Sith artifacts. Before leaving, Strange turned to the Night Sister, who regarded him silently. "Your power is remarkable," he said. "It mirrors the dark dimension in some ways, but it is tethered, disciplined, dangerous in the wrong hands, yes, but it can be a force for balance." She inclined her head. "You walk a precarious path, Sorcerer. Both your world and ours may crumble if you falter. Remember this." Strange nodded. The rebels, still blinking in the pale light of the Dathomir night, murmured their thanks. He had protected them, guided them through danger, and now provided them with insights and strategies that might save lives in the coming conflict. But he also knew that the Empire would not rest. Vader's hunt was relentless, Palpatine's curiosity insatiable, and the holocron fragments, powerful enough to bend realities, still loomed like a storm on the horizon. As they prepared to depart Dathomir, Strange's mind replayed the day's lessons. Magic here, force here, dark side and eldritch arts. They all intersected in subtle, terrifying ways. He understood now that confronting Palpatine would require more than skill. It would require cunning, alliances, and an understanding of how to manipulate energies the Sith could not yet comprehend. For the first time, he realized that survival depended not only on power, but on perception, adaptability, and the courage to embrace the unfamiliar. Above, the moons of Dathomir glimmered faintly, and a gentle wind stirred the crimson leaves. Strange's cloak snapped forward, catching the light of the moons, a symbolic reminder that he was no longer a visitor but a participant in this galaxy's struggle. The rebels followed, cautious but emboldened, understanding that this strange sorcerer, alien, enigmatic, and undeniably powerful, might be the edge they needed against the Empire and the Sith. And for Strange, the horizon held a promise of both danger and opportunity. He had learned, adapted, and survived so far. The next steps would test him in ways even the mirror dimension and the dark dimension could not have prepared him for. But he had a path forward, a fragile, precarious path through dark forests, across blood-red moons, and into the heart of the Sith Empire itself. The galaxy had become more dangerous, but for the first time since his arrival, Strange felt the faintest glimmer of control. The oppressive shadow of Mustafar's distant volcanic eruptions seemed almost serene compared to the weight pressing down on Strange as he approached the Imperial transit hub near Korriban. Every step carried a foreboding rhythm, the sort that only arises when a predator has already marked its prey. And he did not have to guess who that predator was. He had sensed it hours ago. A ripple in the force that twisted his own mystical energies like a knife in wet cloth. Vader was coming. The Dark Lord's presence was unmistakable, a storm of anger and precision, a black tide of malice that warped the air around him. Strange's mind raced through possibilities. Lightsabers could slice through almost anything, even magical constructs, but telekinesis combined with raw, dark-side power was a threat unlike anything he had faced. He adjusted the cloak of levitation, letting it coil and shift as if alive, ready to counteract attacks faster than his human reflexes could manage. A tremor shook the stone streets, and the first Imperial probe droids skidded into view, sensors glowing red, scanning for anomalies. Strange's eyes narrowed, and with a quick gesture, he sent them spiraling into illusions of themselves, looping in infinite duplicates until they short-circuited. The rebels ducked behind him, mouths open in awe. What just?" one muttered, but there was no time for explanation. Vader would arrive within moments. Then the air shifted. The characteristic hum and mechanical respiration filled the valley. Strange's heart beat a touch faster, even as his astral senses warned him of the impending storm. Vader emerged from the shadows. Lightsaber ignited, a deadly red blade slicing the gloom. The Sith Lord's mask reflected nothing, yet radiated authority and malice in every line. He stepped forward, deliberate and unhurried, his black cape billowing as though fed by the dark currents surrounding him. "You are different," Vader said, voice modulated yet commanding. "I have felt the Force, the dark side, and yet what are you?" Strange raised a hand, forming a subtle glyph of containment in the air, a shimmering cage of mystical energy designed to repel kinetic force. "I am Stephen Strange, Sorcerer," he replied. "I come from another world, drawn here by forces you cannot yet comprehend. I seek knowledge, not conquest, but I will defend myself." Vader tilted his head slightly, an almost imperceptible acknowledgement of respect or curiosity. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he sent a surge of telekinetic force toward Strange. The ground beneath him erupted, stone and sand levitating violently. Strange countered immediately, channeling energy through a series of rapid eldritch bindings, twisting the floating debris into a rotating shield around him. Rocks clashed against his magical constructs, creating a chorus of explosions and sparks as the air pulsed with mingled dark side and eldritch energy. The rebels gawked from behind cover, whispering among themselves about the impossibility of the spectacle. Strange's focus remained razor-sharp. Vader's telekinesis was unlike any energy he had manipulated before, precise, unyielding, and suffused with intent to dominate. Yet Strange adapted, folding the ambient force into his spells, subtly harmonizing rather than resisting, turning Vader's pushes into momentum for counter-constructs. He marveled briefly. This was no ordinary duel. This was a collision of philosophies. The rigid, hierarchical power of the dark side versus the disciplined, adaptive creativity of the mystic arts. Vader's next move was relentless. He lunged, swinging his lightsaber in wide, destructive arcs. Strange had anticipated this. He shifted into astral projection mid-leap, leaving his corporeal body to absorb the blade's impact while his spirit wove through the battlefield. In this form, he could manipulate multiple areas at once, creating spectral duplicates to confuse the Sith Lord. Yet Vader's awareness was terrifyingly acute. He extended a force grip, seizing one of Strange's illusions, crushing it mid-air with a crunch that echoed in the valley. Strange's cloak of levitation flared, whipping him backward. He touched the edge of a collapsed wall and transmuted the rubble into a lattice of shimmering energy, forming a temporary barrier. Vader did not pause. He swung the lightsaber with surgical precision, cutting through the lattice as though it were paper. Strange's teeth gritted. He realized quickly that brute eldritch force alone would not suffice. He needed creativity and adaptability. He channeled magic into subtle distortions of gravity, making the valley itself a shifting maze. Vader's steps faltered even briefly as terrain warped beneath him. Then came the moment of escalation. Strange combined a spell of temporal echo, a fragment of time-stone energy stabilized through mystic wards, to slow Vader's movements for a fraction of a heartbeat. In that instant, he struck, sending a series of energy constructs spiraling toward the Sith Lord, forcing him onto the defensive. Yet even as Strange pressed the attack, he sensed Vader's own mastery of focus. The Dark Lord adapted almost instantly, employing a force-enhanced precision that allowed him to deflect attacks without committing fully. The duel escalated into a dance of destruction across the valley. Stone, ash, and debris whirled like a miniature hurricane, illuminated by flashes of red and blue energy as magic met lightsaber and telekinesis met eldritch constructs. Strange realized with both fear and awe that this was not simply combat. It was a test of will, strategy, and philosophy. Each movement was a statement of intent. Every spell and swing conveyed understanding of one's own limits, as well as the opponent's. Yet, even amid chaos, Strange spotted an opportunity. Vader's breathing, rhythmic and mechanical, masked the subtle oscillations in the Dark Lord's concentration. If he could exploit those micro-fluctuations, timing his astral strikes to coincide with Vader's own shifts in force focus, he could create a temporary opening. Strange whispered an incantation, weaving in Night Sister-inspired energy patterns he had observed on Dathomir, blending them with his own arcane runes. The result was a prismatic web of binding energy, momentarily locking Vader's movement and forcing him to plant his feet against the ground. Vader roared, a mechanical, terrifying sound, and unleashed a torrent of raw force energy. Stones flew like missiles, and the valley seemed to shake from the sheer output. Strange held firm, letting some energy pass through controlled channels, redirecting kinetic force against the terrain to destabilize Vader's footing further. The rebels ducked instinctively, the air vibrating against their eardrums. For a brief moment, Strange's plan succeeded. Vader was stalled. But then, as quickly as the moment appeared, it passed. Vader's saber cut through one of Strange's spectral bindings, the energy tearing apart with a hiss of warping air. The Sith Lord advanced relentlessly, eyes fixed, a predator sensing the scent of its quarry. Strange exhaled sharply. He had learned much about Vader in mere minutes, not just his strength, but his strategy, his adaptability, and his willingness to exploit any opening. The duel was far from over, and any misstep could be catastrophic. Strange lifted his hands, murmuring a counter-incantation, stabilizing his constructs while subtly scanning the valley for potential environmental advantages. He knew one thing for certain: this fight would not be won by raw power alone. The Force, the mystic arts, and his ingenuity would need to converge seamlessly. And even then, victory would not guarantee safety. Imperial reinforcements were inevitable, and the holocron fragments remained an uncontested danger. Above, the twin moons of Korriban hung low, casting a blood-red light over the battlefield. Strange's eyes narrowed. He could feel the echoes of the rift tugging at him again, a reminder that while he dueled Vader, the larger war for dimensional stability raged on. He had survived the mirror dimension, the Sith artifacts, and now the Dark Lord himself. But this confrontation marked a turning point. Either he would adapt fully to the Force and integrate it into his mystic arsenal, or the Empire would claim him, and the multiverse consequences would be catastrophic. The duel paused only briefly, as both combatants assessed each other. Vader's mechanical breathing filled the silence, a rhythm of inevitability. Strange's cloak of levitation hovered like a sentinel, ready to react. The rebels, wide-eyed and tense, understood they were witnessing not just a battle of survival, but a collision of universal philosophies, one rooted in the disciplined manipulation of mystical energy, the other in unyielding domination through the dark side. Strange adjusted his stance, whispering under his breath, "The rift won't wait. Neither can I." The duel with Vader had drained more than physical stamina. It had shaken Strange's sense of strategy, forcing him to confront a truth he had long avoided. In this galaxy, raw power alone was insufficient. Even the mystic arts, as formidable as they were, had limits when faced with a Force-sensitive Titan whose presence warped reality around him. And now, atop the obsidian cliffs of Korriban, another shadow emerged, one darker and more deliberate than Vader. Emperor Palpatine arrived not with the theatrics of a tyrant, but with the calm inevitability of a predator. His robes swept over the jagged rocks, black as the void between stars, embroidered with subtle crimson threads that pulsed faintly with Sith energy. His eyes, yellowed with the dark side, met Strange's immediately, and in that instant, the sorcerer felt the full weight of millennia of Sith cunning pressing against him. It was not just power, it was intelligence, manipulation, and patience distilled into a being who had survived centuries by anticipating the future. "Dr. Strange?" Palpatine's voice cut through the wind, melodic, yet venomous. "I have felt your arrival across the currents of the Force. Such an anomaly is intriguing. Tell me, do you understand where you stand?" Strange did not flinch, though his mind raced. He knew Palpatine was not here merely to test him. He wanted a choice, a bargaining position, one that would bind Strange's abilities to the Empire or, at the very least, reveal weaknesses to be exploited. "I understand enough," Strange replied evenly. "I am not your enemy. I am here to contain a threat far larger than either of us, the holocrons. Your dark side manipulations. They risk more than your galaxy." Palpatine's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Ambitious, cautious, yet naive. You speak as though the galaxy belongs to a higher principle than power itself. And that is quaint." The Emperor lifted a hand, gesturing, and the wind stilled, the clouds above forming a swirling vortex of shadow. "I propose a bargain. Teach me the mystic arts, your understanding of dimensional energy, and in exchange, I will provide you the source of power necessary to repair your sling ring. You will return to your world unbound, armed with knowledge few could ever possess." Strange's brow furrowed. The offer was tempting, impossibly so. The ability to return home was a siren call, yet every fiber of his being screamed caution. Palpatine's reputation was written in blood, in betrayal, in universes bent to his will. "Why should I trust you?" Strange asked, his voice calm but edged with the power of a man prepared to defend himself. "You manipulate, enslave, destroy. You're asking me to empower the very source of that corruption." Palpatine chuckled softly, the sound drifting like smoke across the jagged valley. "Trust is irrelevant, Doctor. I ask only that you demonstrate your understanding. Survival in this galaxy is a currency, and I offer you a transaction. Do you take it, or do you continue this fool's errand of resistance?" Strange's mind raced. The Rebels and Night Sisters' lessons echoed in his memory. To ally with Palpatine, even partially, could allow him to access resources to repair the sling ring, but it would also bind him, morally if not magically, to the machinations of a tyrant whose patience and cunning rivaled his own. Yet outright refusal could provoke immediate assault, potentially sacrificing not just himself, but the rebels and the fragile alliances he had cultivated. He could not fight Palpatine outright, not yet, not without further preparation. "I will not join you," Strange said finally, his tone unwavering. "But I will listen. I will understand. And I will leave only when my purpose is complete." Palpatine's eyes gleamed, a predator delighted by a fight of intellect as much as skill. "Clever. Very well. Observation is a form of participation, yes? You will see much, and perhaps if you are perceptive, you will learn how easily one can bend destiny to one's will." For the next hours, or was it days, Strange remained on Korriban under Palpatine's watchful gaze. The Emperor permitted him access to Sith holocrons, ancient texts, and forbidden artifacts, but only under strict supervision. Each page Strange turned, each ritual he witnessed, revealed both elegance and horror. Techniques for extracting life energy, bending midichlorians to unnatural ends, and weaving entire star systems into instruments of domination. He recognized parallels to Dormammu's dark dimension, but here the power was tinged with malice rather than chaos. Yet in his study, Strange discovered a unique opportunity. He could subtly integrate the Force's natural currents into his spell work, creating hybrid glyphs that would allow limited portability for his sling ring. Each trial required delicate calibration, as Sith magic inherently sought to dominate, corrupt, or consume the user. The effort taxed him, drawing heavily on concentration and the residual rift energy, but it also provided a rare advantage: understanding how the dark side and mystic arts could interact without annihilating one another. Palpatine, ever aware, observed silently. "Impressive," he said once, voice low, almost admiring. "You manipulate what should destroy you. Most mortals would be undone by exposure to even a fraction of this power." Strange nodded without looking up. "I am not mortal in the usual sense, but I am cautious. That is enough to survive. For now." And yet, even as Strange worked, the Emperor's words gnawed at him. This was not simply a test of skill, it was a moral gauntlet. Could he even temporarily use knowledge gained from Palpatine to turn the tide against the Empire? Could he manipulate the very dark side he sought to contain, bending it to prevent greater catastrophe? Or would even the smallest miscalculation allow the Emperor to ensnare him, exploiting his desire to return home? Strange realized the complexity of his situation. Palpatine's offer, though tempting, was a trap masked as opportunity. The Sorcerer Supreme would gain power, yes, but at what cost? Every spell cast in Palpatine's presence was a lesson in patience, deception, and perception. Every artifact studied was a reminder that the Sith's philosophy thrived not on brute force alone, but on bending others to their will without breaking them outright. By the time Strange completed his initial research, he had not only stabilized the sling ring for local dimensional jumps, but also acquired an understanding of how to counter certain dark side amplifications, knowledge that might prove critical when confronting Vader again or the Emperor himself. Yet he also knew one truth above all else. Palpatine would expect repayment. The Emperor's patience was infinite, and his memory unforgiving. Any misstep, any moral compromise, even minor, could become leverage in a galaxy already fraught with danger. As Strange prepared to depart, Palpatine spoke one final time, a silky whisper that carried through the obsidian halls. "Remember, Dr. Strange, the line between power and corruption is thinner than you imagine. Walk carefully, for every choice you make will echo through the stars." Strange inclined his head, acknowledging the warning, yet already plotting his next move. The Empire's reach was vast, its ambition limitless, but he had learned enough to survive, adapt, and exploit openings that even a master of the dark side might overlook. He stepped from the obsidian cliffs, sling ring ready, rebels and Night Sister allies behind him. The distant horizon burned with the light of twin moons, a reminder that time and space in this galaxy were as mutable as any spell he could cast, but also that every action now carried consequences that would ripple far beyond Korriban. Strange was no longer merely a visitor. He was a participant, a force of his own making, walking a razor's edge between survival, morality, and cosmic responsibility. And in that precarious balance, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Palpatine's offer had revealed more than opportunity. It had illuminated the path of strategy, foresight, and cunning that would be required for the ultimate confrontation. A confrontation that, sooner or later, would bring Sorcerer Supreme and Sith Emperor face to face in a duel that could shatter dimensions. The Imperial facility loomed like a fortress carved from black obsidian, a monolith of control in the heart of Korriban. Its energy fields pulsed rhythmically, lights tracing corridors like veins of a living organism. Strange hovered just beyond the perimeter, cloaked in shadow and levitating a few meters above the rocky ground. The sling ring, now partially stabilized with a hybrid of mystic arts and residual kyber energy, hummed faintly in his grasp. He could create short-range portals, but returning to Earth? That would require more than clever spell work. He needed the crystals within this facility. Strange exhaled slowly, centering himself. Every step forward would be a dance of patience, perception, and precision. The Imperials had augmented defenses beyond standard droids. He could sense them through the Force as they pulsed with alert status, like predators sensing prey. Yet even they had never encountered a sorcerer capable of folding dimensions into his favor. Astral projection, spatial distortions, and illusionary doubles were all at his disposal, but one miscalculation, one misaligned glyph, and alarms would cascade across the facility. He descended toward the main gate, eyes narrowing. Strange whispered an incantation, sending the ground beneath the guards' feet to appear molten and unstable. They froze, unsure whether to flee or call for reinforcements. In that fraction of hesitation, he teleported inside a portal, landing on a catwalk 2 levels above. The first line of defense neutralized almost effortlessly. He moved like water, fluid, shifting with both force-sensitive intuition and arcane foresight. Inside, corridors stretched endlessly, lit by red emergency strips that flickered as if anticipating his every movement. Strange's knowledge of Sith architecture came not from familiarity, but deduction. Dark energy leached from the walls, whispering in resonance with the Force. It reminded him of Dormammu's dark dimension, but here it was structured, methodical, calculated. He tapped into the energy, subtly weaving it into protective wards. Shadows became allies, vibrations became maps, and the facility itself seemed almost pliant under his manipulation. The Kyber Vault was located beneath the central core, a high-security chamber designed to resist even the most determined Sith artifact hunters. Strange could feel the hum of concentrated power, the crystalline resonance vibrating against his skull, even through the reinforced floors. This was no ordinary energy source. These crystals had been forged to channel the Force, amplifying both light and dark applications. If integrated into the sling ring, they could theoretically open portals across vast distances, bridging dimensions, but only if handled delicately. One misstep could overload the ring, tearing him from both galaxies. As he approached the vault, a patrol of Inquisitors entered the corridor ahead. 4 of them, cloaked and gloved, sabers ignited in anticipation of any threat. Strange's fingers twitched. One misstep would reveal his position. But the Inquisitors had underestimated the adaptive potential of a sorcerer whose power was alien to the Force. With a subtle gesture, he folded the corridor into a loop within the mirror dimension, creating multiple reflections of himself while remaining physically unseen. The Inquisitors stumbled through endless corridors, attacking shadows, becoming increasingly disoriented. He exhaled, moving forward. The final security gates were layered with energy fields that pulsed with dark side frequency, designed to disrupt Force-sensitive manipulation. Strange gritted his teeth and extended the sling ring, opening a stable portal through which his hands passed first, mapping the field's energy. Using a combination of mystic arts sigils and limited Force attunement, he siphoned the energy into counter-warding glyphs, neutralizing the disruption enough to pass safely. Each moment required precise focus. Even the slightest tremor in his concentration would trigger alarms or worse, trap energy back into him, causing catastrophic feedback. The vault door opened into a cavernous chamber where the kyber crystals floated in containment fields, humming in symphony. Strange's eyes widened. The resonance of the crystals was intoxicating, almost sentient. He whispered a chant, weaving ethereal threads around the containment field, slowly disentangling the energy from the dark side distortions. His hands glowed as eldritch energy intertwined with Force resonance, bending the crystals into a portable lattice without shattering them. It was delicate work, akin to extracting a star from a black hole without letting gravity rip it apart. But just as he secured the first cluster of crystals, the air thickened. The Force pulsed violently, a presence approaching, deliberate, malevolent. Strange froze. Vader had sensed him. The Inquisitors had recovered from the mirror dimension trick and reported back. Within moments, the Dark Lord's black silhouette appeared at the vault entrance, lightsaber ignited, eyes fixed. "Dr. Strange?" Vader's voice rumbled, mechanical yet terrifyingly alive. "You overreach." Strange pivoted. His first instinct was offense, but he recognized the danger. The confined space would amplify Vader's telekinetic strikes and lightsaber swings. Instead, he created a series of miniature portals, flickering between the chamber and the adjacent halls, confusing Vader's perception. In one fluid motion, he levitated several crystal clusters, forming an orb of pulsating energy that spun around him like a shield and potential weapon. Vader advanced, stepping through a portal himself, a manifestation of relentless precision. Strange felt the blade cut through one of his protective constructs, shattering it against the containment lattice. Crystals rattled, threatening instability. Using astral projection, Strange projected a spectral form above Vader, baiting him to strike, while simultaneously stabilizing the lattice with his corporeal self. The coordination required split-second timing, a fusion of Force awareness and arcane artistry. The clash became a ballet of impossible physics. Lightsaber sparks met shimmering eldritch energy. Force pushes collided with gravity-manipulating spells. Each attack and counterattack resonated with raw energy, shaking the vault and causing small fragments of containment energy to spark dangerously. The rebels outside the vault's comm channels gasped as Strange communicated via short-range astral link, warning them to stand clear. Finally, sensing an opening, Strange summoned a small localized rift, a flickering portal that siphoned excess energy from the vault's containment fields into a controlled feedback loop. Vader recoiled, his telekinetic grasp momentarily disrupted by the unfamiliar dimensional distortion. Strange seized the moment, pocketing the stabilized kyber crystals within a protective glyph lattice. The sling ring hummed, resonating with both mystic and force energies. A jump home was now conceivable, but only if he could evade the inevitable pursuit. Strange exhaled sharply, preparing for the exit. He would have to navigate past Vader, the Inquisitors, and the reinforced corridors. Yet he felt a thrill, a grim satisfaction. The gamble had succeeded. The Empire had underestimated him. The fusion of mystic arts and force resonance had yielded results no Sith could predict. He could feel the lattice of kyber energy integrating with his sling ring, preparing him for short-range dimensional jumps that might buy time to locate the ultimate energy source for his return home. And yet, as he moved toward the extraction point, the echo of Palpatine's words reverberated in his mind. The line between power and corruption is thinner than you imagine. Strange knew that this success, while tactical, came at a cost. Every action taken in the Empire's heart was a message, a revelation of capability, and an invitation for retaliation. The Kyber Crystal Gambit had worked, but the war for survival and for the fate of both dimensions was far from over. Above the vault, the twin moons of Korriban cast a crimson glow on the swirling clouds of ash and debris. Strange levitated the last of the crystals, his mind calculating the next sequence of jumps, the next points of tactical advantage. He knew the heist was only the beginning. Palpatine's interest in his actions would only grow, Vader's pursuit would intensify, and the very fabric of reality threatened to fracture under the collision of mystic arts and Sith energy. Strange's lips curled into a slight, grim smile. He was not finished. He had kyber crystals, he had new insights, and he had lived to see the first stage of the Empire's defenses bent, not broken, but bent to his will. The next phase would be more dangerous, more complex, and far more consequential. But he was ready. He turned toward the nearest exit portal. Sling ring humming, crystals cradled in magical containment. The shadows of Korriban shifted as though alive, and in the distance, he felt the unmistakable pulse of the Emperor's awareness, a reminder that nothing in this galaxy was ever simple, and no success went unchallenged. Strange's journey had taken him through mirrors, shadows, and dimensions. But now, with the kyber crystals in hand, he was poised for the confrontation that would define not only his survival, but the fate of the galaxy itself. Strange emerged from the shadows of Korriban, sling ring humming with kyber-infused energy, the stolen crystals secured in protective wards. The air was thick with tension, a blend of residual dark-side corruption and the faint hum of his magical lattice. Every instinct screamed that Palpatine knew, had always known, the exact sequence of his moves. The Emperor's intelligence was a living, calculating force. He did not merely observe, he anticipated, manipulating even allies and enemies as pawns in his cosmic chessboard. The Sorcerer Supreme had acquired the kyber crystals, learned to weave limited force currents into his spell work, and survived Vader's pursuit. But none of it mattered if Palpatine could turn the situation against him. Strange's mind raced through the possible outcomes. The Emperor could offer safe passage in exchange for a single teaching, then twist it into obedience. He could attempt to seize the sling ring, corrupt the crystals, or trap Strange within a dimensional rift of his own design. Any misstep could doom not only himself, but the rebels and Night Sisters who had aided him. He focused. Time to act decisively. Strange opened a portal to the Imperial Palace on Coruscant, carefully masking its signature from the Force as best he could. A direct confrontation with the Emperor was risky. More than risky, it was almost suicidal, but there was no other path. Strange had to see the future Palpatine planned, and to confront him directly, to force a moral choice. The multiversal laws he obeyed left room for ingenuity, and Strange intended to exploit them fully. Inside the throne room, the Emperor waited, as if he had been expecting this exact moment. Coruscant's skyline sprawled beyond the vast windows, bathed in the blood-red glow of evening fires ignited by Imperial campaigns. Palpatine's hands rested lightly on the armrests, a subtle hum of dark-side energy radiating outward, brushing against Strange's mind. The air seemed thick, charged with an almost palpable malevolence. "Dr. Strange," the Emperor said smoothly, voice like silk over steel. "You play a dangerous game. Do you realize what you risk?" "I do," Strange replied, voice steady, every syllable deliberate. "But knowledge cannot remain hidden. Power cannot remain unchecked. I need to see what you intend, Palpatine, and I need to prevent it. Not just for this galaxy, but for the multiverse." The Emperor tilted his head, studying him as a scientist examines a specimen, fascinated but unconcerned by the danger. "Bold," he said, almost approvingly, "and reckless. I wonder if your vision can survive exposure to reality itself." Strange activated the Time Stone, carefully, with a counter spell to prevent temporal feedback. Palpatine's Force signature flared in response, sensing a breach in the linear flow of time. The chamber itself seemed to bend. Strange glimpsed multiple futures: Imperial fleets decimating planetary systems, entire star clusters rewritten into engines of oppression, countless lives extinguished in the service of dark-side consolidation. Even the rebels, scattered and courageous, were crushed under the weight of inevitability. Palpatine's vision was cold, precise, absolute. The images were staggering, almost paralyzing. Strange's cloak twitched as the visions threatened to overwhelm him. But he forced focus, threading the Time Stone with his mystical wards, anchoring himself to the present. He realized in that moment that the Emperor did not merely seek dominion, he sought the total rewriting of cosmic order. Worlds, realities, dimensions, all could be subsumed into his will if left unchecked. The moral dilemma struck with full force. If Strange attacked, he could destroy Palpatine, or at least disrupt the Empire. But doing so risked destabilizing the timeline, creating rifts that could collapse entire systems. If he negotiated, he might gain temporary safety, but the galaxy would remain enslaved. If he betrayed Palpatine's trust, the consequences could be catastrophic, yet the alternative, inaction, was morally unacceptable. Every option carried consequences measured in lives, stars, and the fragile balance of multiversal law. Palpatine rose slowly, sensing the disruption. "You have seen what is coming," he said, voice low and deliberate. "And yet you hesitate. Power is not merely taken, Dr. Strange. It is forged, shaped, and imposed. Will you take what is necessary, or will you remain a spectator to inevitability?" Strange's hands moved subtly, arcane glyphs forming in the air as the Time Stone's glow intensified. His mind aligned with the force currents he had begun to understand, weaving the two energies together into a hybrid spell. He had learned enough from the Kyber-infused sling ring, the Night Sisters, and the rebels to act. "I choose to act," Strange said finally, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of energy around him. "Not for power, not for revenge, but for the future. For every being who cannot defend themselves." With a swift motion, he unleashed a Time Stone-enhanced spell, projecting a multi-dimensional vision of the Empire's future atrocities directly into Palpatine's perception. Pain, fear, and the weight of countless deaths struck the Emperor as a psychic strike, a hammer of moral confrontation. Palpatine's yellow eyes narrowed, momentarily caught off guard, not by force, but by vision. The Emperor's reaction was instantaneous. His hands sparked with dark-side energy, striking at Strange with concentrated telekinetic fury. But Strange had anticipated this. The sling ring created a lattice of portals around him, deflecting and dispersing the attacks while simultaneously containing the vision in overlapping, cascading dimensional layers. Palpatine roared, a sound that reverberated through the throne room, shaking pillars and cracking hololithic consoles. Even he had underestimated the fusion of mystic arts and Force insight. In that moment, Strange realized the paradox of the situation. Palpatine was both omnipotent and vulnerable, absolute in his cunning but susceptible to moral and perceptual attack. By showing him the weight of his own designs, Strange forced a choice upon the Emperor: continue unrestrained, risking exposure of his plans across multiple timelines, or reconsider the calculus of domination when confronted by an intelligence that operated outside the Force's known parameters. The decision was subtle, almost imperceptible. Palpatine's body tensed, his energy pulsating differently, measured now, controlled, calculating the cost. Strange withdrew the vision gradually, retreating to a defensive stance while maintaining a network of portals and wards. The Emperor's gaze remained fixed, assessing the situation, recognizing the anomaly in this human from another universe who dared to manipulate both time and space against him. "I am not your enemy. Yet," Strange said, voice calm but firm. "But if you continue your path unchecked, I will be. And the galaxy and the multiverse will suffer consequences you cannot predict." Palpatine's lips curved in a smile that was equal parts amusement and threat. "Very well, Dr. Strange. You have shown initiative. But do not mistake this for leniency. The game is far from over. Our paths will cross again, and when they do, the stakes will be absolute." Strange knew then that the bargain had been broken, not through negotiation, not through submission, but through insight, foresight, and moral resolve. The Empire had been warned, Palpatine had been confronted, and while the cost of future confrontation remained unknown, the Sorcerer Supreme had established a precedent. He would not be manipulated, and he would not compromise his principles, even when the alternative seemed the safer route. With the Kyber crystals secured and a temporary path home now theoretically possible, Strange stepped back through a short-range portal, disappearing from the throne room before Vader or any Imperial guards could respond. The corridors of Coruscant seemed to bend in the aftermath of his departure, a silent echo of dimensional interference left in his wake. Outside, the city planet glimmered with a deceptive calm, masking the chaos just beneath the surface. He emerged into the relative safety of a neutral sector, cloak billowing, sling ring humming with both mystic and Force energy. The rebels who had tracked him through Korriban's intelligence networks waited, awed by the results of his gambit. Strange offered only a nod, focusing on stabilizing the Kyber lattice within his sling ring, ensuring that it could endure the strain of interdimensional jumps. Even as he did so, the echoes of his confrontation with Palpatine lingered in his mind. The moral weight of the choice he had imposed, the vision of possible futures, the realization that power, when unchecked, corrupted absolutely, all of it would shape the decisions he made in the battles to come. And for the first time since arriving in this galaxy, Strange felt the weight of agency. He was no longer a visitor, no longer merely reacting to the Empire's designs. He had forced a decision, carved a path of resistance, and demonstrated that even in a galaxy dominated by Sith cunning, there existed a force beyond the Force, the disciplined, moral, and multiversal intelligence of a sorcerer who refused to yield. The path ahead was dangerous, uncertain, and fraught with ethical dilemmas. But Strange had made his choice. He would act not for victory alone, but for the preservation of life, of reality, and of principles that transcended galaxies. And he would do so fully aware that the Emperor would not forget, and that Vader would not forgive. Coruscant's Imperial palace loomed above the city like a jagged black crown, the blood-red sunset casting long shadows across its spires. Inside, the throne room was transformed into a battlefield of anticipation. Palpatine sat atop his throne, the ambient Force energy thick with malevolence, his yellow eyes gleaming like molten metal. Vader stood to one side, a silent sentinel of impending doom. Strange appeared through a carefully concealed portal, the kyber crystals now integrated into his sling ring, glowing faintly as he hovered above the polished floor. The room vibrated with tension. Strange could sense every subtle ripple in the Force, every calculated heartbeat of the dark side, and yet he remained in full control of his mystic arts. The Time Stone pulsed faintly, linked to his spells, ready to bend causality if needed. Every movement had to be precise. One misjudged reaction, and Palpatine could collapse dimensions around him or crush him with a telekinetic strike. Palpatine rose slowly, an ominous smile stretching across his face. "Dr. Strange," he hissed, "your meddling in affairs far beyond your comprehension ends here. You cannot hope to resist the dark side's will." His hands extended, arcs of dark lightning crackling along his fingers. The air burned as the energy raced towards Strange, but the sorcerer was ready. He raised his hands, forming a barrier of eldritch shields interlaced with kyber energy. The lightning met the shields, sizzling and dispersing harmlessly into the protective lattice. Vader stepped forward, lightsaber ignited, his presence commanding and suffocating. The Dark Lord's blade hummed as he advanced. The Force surging outward in waves meant to destabilize Strange's concentration. Strange responded with mirrored dimensional folds, creating illusory duplicates of himself that darted in multiple directions. He cast a spell weaving between portals, the sling ring amplifying his mobility. Vader's strikes passed through illusions, but the real Strange moved unpredictably, channeling both mystic arts and Force attunement to anticipate each move. The duel escalated rapidly. Palpatine unleashed torrents of Force lightning, each bolt twisting reality where it struck. Strange countered with arcane glyphs that transformed the bolts into harmless spectral tendrils, redirecting some into mirrored dimensions, some back toward the Emperor in controlled bursts. The throne room groaned as reality warped under the clash of cosmic and Sith power. Chandeliers rattled, windows cracked, and the city's noise below seemed muted, as though even Coruscant held its breath. Strange's cloak of levitation moved almost sentiently, dodging strikes, positioning him perfectly, and even sweeping objects into shields that formed additional layers of protection. He folded the mirror dimension selectively, trapping pieces of the room, throne, columns, statues, into alternate planes, only to release them in ways that disoriented his foes. Every move was a blend of precision, foresight, and creativity, a master of mystical law versus the Emperor's centuries of dark side cunning. Vader pressed relentlessly, slashing and striking, using the Force to manipulate gravity and pull debris toward Strange. But the sorcerer had adapted, integrating Force pulses into his spells. He transmuted fragments of the debris into harmless ether, redirected them as shields, and occasionally sent them ricocheting toward Vader in controlled bursts. The Dark Lord's attacks, though powerful, lacked the multiversal adaptability of Strange's combined mystic arts and Force integration. Palpatine grew impatient. "You will not escape me," he shouted, summoning immense streams of Force lightning that fused with shadows, forming serpentine constructs. Strange's response was immediate. He summoned an astral duplicate, projecting it forward while simultaneously casting a dimensional distortion that fragmented the lightning, sending it ricocheting off his arcane barriers. The throne room shuddered violently. Fragments of the ceiling collapsed into suspended microportals that twisted and folded back into themselves, creating a chaotic kaleidoscope of energy. The confrontation reached its zenith when Strange opened a time-infused portal directly above the Emperor. The portal projected multiple timelines of Palpatine's potential defeats, overwhelming his perception. The Emperor snarled, attempting to stabilize reality with the dark side, but each correction opened a new vulnerability. Strange moved through the lattice of kyber-powered portals, striking with a combination of eldritch spells, time distortions, and concentrated energy constructs. Vader intercepted one strike, but Strange had anticipated this. Using a spell of displacement, he shifted his momentum through micro-portals, delivering a psychic arcane strike that forced the Sith apprentice to stagger. Vader recovered quickly. Yet the sorcerer's maneuvers had already sown enough confusion to destabilize the Emperor's rhythm. Palpatine's aura flickered, as though the very force around him was being challenged by something outside its natural order. "You are persistent," Palpatine hissed, though the edge of unease laced his tone. "But persistence alone does not grant mastery over destiny." He summoned the dark side fully, generating a vortex of energy that twisted reality into a spiraling void. Strange countered, weaving eldritch threads through the kyber lattice, stabilizing the chamber while forcing the vortex to fracture. Reality trembled under the clash. Windows cracked, floor panels buckled, and shadows writhed unnaturally. Finally, Strange made the calculated decision. Using the Time Stone and Sling Ring synergy, he created a concentrated bubble of altered temporal reality around Palpatine. Within this micro-dimension, multiple consequences of the Emperor's atrocities played out simultaneously. Victories that were Pyrrhic, betrayals among loyalists, futures of corruption and collapse. Palpatine was forced to witness the weight of his own designs magnified across time, dimension, and consequence. The dark side roared, but it could not break the perception of inevitability Strange had constructed. Palpatine faltered, a near imperceptible hesitation. Strange used the moment to strike with a controlled, non-lethal blast of eldritch force energy, sending the Emperor sprawling across the floor. Vader leapt to defend, but Strange's portals forced the Dark Lord into evasive action, giving him just enough space to stabilize the kyber-imbued sling ring. He opened a portal that would take him to a secure neutral location, an immediate extraction point where he could plan the next phase of his mission while keeping Palpatine contained for the moment. As Strange moved through the portal, he cast one final glance back. Palpatine's form shimmered within the time-distorted micro-dimension, fury and calculation etched into every line of his face. The Emperor was not defeated, far from it. But Strange had demonstrated the multiversal, moral, and tactical superiority of his combined mystic arts and force-adapted strategy. He had broken the Emperor's momentum, disrupted the cycle of inevitability, and ensured that the galaxy now had a fighting chance against tyranny. Emerging from the portal into the night sky of a neutral system, Strange felt the weight of the battle settle around him. Coruscant had not been won or lost. Rather, the Sorcerer Supreme had carved a path through the heart of Sith power. The kyber crystals glowed faintly, the sling ring stabilized, and Strange could sense, if only vaguely, the temporal and dimensional distortions his actions had wrought. He was neither victor nor conqueror, but a guardian of possibility. The galaxy remained under the Empire's shadow, but Strange had proven a critical truth. Even in a universe dominated by the dark side, a being operating under principles of foresight, discipline, and moral resolve could challenge destiny itself. Palpatine's warning echoed in his mind, a reminder that this confrontation was only the beginning. The Sith would adapt, Vader would pursue relentlessly, and the threads of the multiverse would continue to twist unpredictably. Strange levitated, cloak fluttering, surveying the starlit horizon. The mission was far from complete, but the precedent had been set. He had acted decisively and strategically against one of the galaxy's most insidious powers. Every choice from here would carry weight. Every portal, spell, and decision, shaping not just the Star Wars galaxy, but potentially the fate of multiple dimensions. And as he prepared for the next move, one truth remained immutable. He was not a pawn. He was the Sorcerer Supreme, operating at the intersection of mystic arts and the Force, wielding both knowledge and morality as weapons against tyranny. The battle had concluded, but the war for balance, freedom, and the multiverse had only just begun. Word count: 1103. Conclusion: 200 words. Dr. Strange had traversed dimensions, outmaneuvered Sith Inquisitors, infiltrated Imperial fortresses, and confronted the Emperor himself. The kyber-infused sling ring now hummed with potential, a bridge between universes, a testament to his ingenuity and adaptability. He had acted not out of vengeance but out of principle, imposing moral choice on one of the galaxy's most cunning manipulators. The Empire had been shaken, the dark side tested. Palpatine survived, but he was no longer untouchable. Strange had demonstrated that even cosmic-level mystics could challenge Sith omnipotence when strategy, magic, and insight converged. The galaxy remained under the Emperor's shadow, yet hope had been rekindled, not through rebellion alone, but through the arrival of a being whose powers transcended conventional understanding. Strange now stood at the crossroads of universes. He could continue aiding the galaxy, blending mystic arts with Force knowledge to protect life and prevent tyranny, or return to his own dimension, leaving this universe to chart its own course. Either choice carried risk, but for the first time, the Sorcerer Supreme had shown that one determined mind could alter destiny itself. Balance had been struck, for now, but the collision of magic and Force had left echoes that would ripple across both galaxies for years to come.